Representative John Garamendi, Democrat of California, a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Good morning to you.
Good to be with you, Pedro.
There is a vote taking place on transportation issues. Do want to talk about that, but
Sure.
First, I want to ask your thoughts, or at least initially, on this announcement about a budget being reached.
Important, really important, and a really good sign that maybe we're actually going to be able to work together, and we have to. We've got really serious problems. The budget is one of them. The sequestration has been an enormous problem, not just for the military, but really for every other activity the federal government involves in. So this is good. It doesn't solve all the world's problems, certainly doesn't solve all of America's problems, but it's a good step forward. As
you're hearing about it, at least as much as you know about it, is this something do you think you could support and vote for?
Yes.
Why
no
so?
doubt about it. Why? Because it solves a problem. It raises, it suspends the debt limit, allows us to continue to pay us, the American government, the American people, to continue to pay our debts, which we ought to do. These are not new debts. These are things that have been paid for over the last generation, actually 2 generations, and we need to pay those bills. So it allows us to do that. Also, it increases the ability for this government to address problems in national defense as well as in domestic programs, and that's critically important.
As far as you probably heard our previous guest talk about issues that he may have, or at least even our callers have had, about looking at Medicare, looking at Social Security disability as a means to reform and pay for this effort. Yeah. Your thoughts on those efforts?
Well, with regard to the Social Security disability programs, it does need to be reformed. I've had a long history in dealing with these things. I was the insurance commissioner in California for 8 years, and we had workers' compensation issues. We had programs that are similar to the Social Security disability, and frankly, there was a lot of fraud going on. And so to deal with the fraud in all of the government programs, including the Social Security disability programs, is important, and the legislation does it a little. Does it go far enough? Remains to be seen. We haven't seen the exact language yet, but clearly there was abusive activities going on in that area, and that's good. Deal with it. With regard to Social Security, there are no cuts to Social Security. There are some changes that take place, but those are minor and do not take any money away from the Social Security recipients.
From your insurance cap, would you see, when you say go further as far as dealing with the issue of disability fraud, how far would you go?
To eliminate the fraud. If somebody is honestly disabled, fine. But people were abusing this program. Actually, it usually happens. Certainly we saw it in workers' compensation. When the economy turns down, people turn to workers' compensation as a way of supplementing their income, often fraudulently. And that's just plain wrong. It hurts everybody in the system. So you need to take a look at this. I think one of the reforms in this requires that there be a medical evaluation, not just a clerk taking in information, but a medical evaluation, and that's important.
Now, you do serve on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Tell us this week about the vote that will take place this week about transportation and infrastructure. What do you expect to happen?
Well, the House of Representatives, I think this week, maybe next week, depending on how this budget deal goes, will be taking up a transportation infrastructure bill. We know that at the end of this month, there will be actually we have to kick the can down the road. And we'll kick the can down the road for about a month or so. And in that intervening period of time, we will take up a larger structural reform of the transportation infrastructure system. And that's important. We're really, really good at kicking the can down the road. We have to come to grips with our infrastructure. The legislation that we'll take up after we kick the can down the road for a month is insufficient. It passed the House of Representatives Transportation Infrastructure Committee last week, and it is woefully insufficient.
Because?
Because it simply continues the underfunding that we presently have. It does not increase the funding beyond a modest rate of inflation. In fact, it doesn't even fully address the inflation. It will guarantee that our transportation systems, our highways, our transit systems, and the freight movement systems will get worse. And that is an indictment of the House of Representatives Committee for not coming up with a robust bill that actually moves this nation forward on the roads, on the rails, on the waterways, in the ports.
The Senate version of this bill 6 years of it goes for 6 years, but 3 years of that is funded. Is that the same along the lines of the House bill?
Both bills are 6-year bills, and frankly, both bills lock in a woefully insufficient amount of money to deal with transportation in this country. A few Americans do get to travel outside the United States. And when they go to Europe, when they go to China, they see a transportation system that actually looks like it might be present day. You come to America, you're looking at a transportation system that is not yesterday, it is way yesterday. And so we need to build this. This is about American jobs. This is about the foundation for economic growth. The Senate bill and the House bill lock in the current level of funding for 6 years. That's a disaster. And we certainly ought not do that.
How much money do you think has to be put out there to take care of our transportation issues, and how much does that compare to actually what's being proposed in the legislation?
About $120 to $150 billion over a 6-year period, more than we presently spend. And we can pay for it. The administration, Department of Transportation, made a proposal called the Grow America Act, which actually does that. And it is fully paid for without increasing the gasoline and diesel tax.
How so?
Well, American corporations have skipped out on their responsibility to this nation. They hide their profits overseas. And the legislation says, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to pay your fair share. This is your home country. This is where your base is. This is where you grew up, Mr. Corporate. And this is where you're going to pay your fair share of the taxes. And it comes to about $140, $150 billion over that 6-year period. Let's do it. Let's let those corporations pay their fair share. And let's build the foundation so that those corporations can grow and so that Americans can have good middle-class jobs.
Representative John Garamendi with us, Democrat of California. As you may have guessed, he serves on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, also serves on the Armed Services Committee. You can ask him questions about these issues that we've discussed this morning. 202-748-8001 for Republicans, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, and 202-748-8002. You can also tweet us at C-SPAN WJ. First call for you comes from Mike this morning. Mike is in Willow Creek, California. Republican line, you're on with our guest.
Hello, Michael.
Well, hello. Greetings from Northern California on this morning. One of the long-standing issues I've had with the way that we fund transportation nationwide is that California, as we all know, pays vastly more into federal taxes due to our demography, nature of our economy, and
Sure.
all of that. And yet there's other states with small populations which we basically are subsidizing.
Well, this is an ongoing problem for California. We've been a donor state for, it seems like, forever, with one exception, and that is in the American Recovery Act, that stimulus bill. For the first time, perhaps in a decade or more, California actually did very well in that particular bill, perhaps because the speaker was from California at the time. But this is an ongoing problem. But we need to take a look at transportation and infrastructure as being a national issue. We know, for example, that the majority of the imports from Asia and really from around the world arrive at the ports in California, Oakland in the north, Long Beach and Los Angeles in the south. Well, that's great. That stuff moves out of the ports and goes on across the country by rail and truck. But the impact is in California, right around those ports and in the cities. And so the National Freight Program that is in the Grow America Act, which I think we really ought to take as the foundation for legislation, has a very significant increase in the freight movement. And that would be a significant and very important thing for California, because it would allow us to not only grow our ports, but also deal with that first and 10th mile coming out of the ports so that we can end some of the congestion that we see in California. Now, the eastern ports have the similar problem, but this is something that has to be dealt with on a national level. And yes, California really is the 7th largest economy in the world, and I'm afraid we're likely to continue to be a donor for some time. But there are specific programs in the transportation infrastructure bill that should be made larger, that would be of specific help to California as well as those other port states around the nation.
From Park Hills, Missouri, Jim is up next, independent line. Hi.
Hello.
You're on.
Good morning, James. My question is the funding of the highways and that. When the money gets allotted to them, who actually has control of where that goes, and who determines what state gets what, and the money that you're putting out there, like I say, the highways are all built with natural materials, natural resources, which belong to we the people here in America. And the money, the way I'm understanding it's fiat money, and it don't have no value anyway. So why do we even charge anybody anything in this country to build anything with natural resources?
Well, you've put about 5 or 6 different issues together there. Let's see if we can take them apart and have a go at it. First of all, the funding at the federal level, almost all of it goes back to the states for what are known as federal highway projects in the state. Some of that money goes back to the state for state programs only. These would be the state highways. And some of it then winds up with local cities and counties. That's the highway piece of it. The transit piece, again, goes back to the local transit districts. Some of it goes to Amtrak, which is a national passenger rail program. So it really varies across the board. Most of the money winds up going back to the states. It's allocated based upon a formula, the number of miles of traffic of highways in an area, the number of ports, rail lines, transit systems, and the like. So there's a specific formula that is wrestled with by the members of Congress as they try to help their individual states and their individual counties and cities. So that's the way in which the money is distributed. There are formulas, there are specific allocation mechanisms set up. Transit, freight movement, and for the highways, both federal interstate highways as well as the local, state, and county and city highways. Now, with regard to an issue you talked about, which are what is the material that's being used, this is really an important question. It has to do with the Buy America standards. And for me, your tax dollars, my tax dollars, everybody's tax dollars ought to be spent on American-made equipment, supplies, and materials. We ought not be buying Chinese steel with your tax dollars to repair the bridges in America. We ought to buy American steel made by American workers in American companies here in the United States. That's a big issue. I'll give you an example. The new Oakland-San Francisco Bay Bridge, a multi-billion-dollar, over $5 billion spent. Most of the steel in that bridge was Chinese steel. They thought it would be cheaper. Turned out to be more expensive because it was of poor quality, the welds were bad. The jobs were in China, not in the United States. I'll give you another example. The Tappan Zee Bridge in New York. American-made steel, American jobs, on time, on budget. My mantra, make it in America, buy America, use your tax dollars for American-made equipment, materials, support American workers.
David from Plainfield, New Jersey, Democrats line. Hi, go ahead.
Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning.
I think the problem that Democrats have is that you do not explain to the people interest rates. And so ultimately, it takes seconds to do, and all you have to do is say to folks, if you've got a home, you know historically when you bought your home, interest rates were at 6%. That's what you paid to the bank. However, the bank paid 2.5% to loan that money to you at 6%, so they made 3.5%. Well, now the bank is paying 25 cents for that money, where they paid $2.50 before. Now they're paying 25 cents. It's free money. So for the Democrats to actually explain that to both Republicans and Democrats and say, people, we can now borrow billions of dollars at 25 cents on the dollar, as opposed to $2.50, and now we're getting ready to increase interest rates sometime next year, early next year. What are they going to increase it? Maybe 25 basis points, which will make it go from 25 cents to 50 cents. You've just doubled the cost of money. So if you do it now, you ultimately are creating jobs. You create jobs, which then gives you a tax base. If we did that as Democrats Make the people understand. Get a chalkboard, get a board, and explain it to the people. It's simple.
Okay. Well, you've raised a very, very important point, and that is that the federal government can borrow money at a very, very low interest rate. The 10-year treasuries are now probably around 2%, maybe even under 2%, but it hovers around that. It's extremely low. Certainly, we ought to refinance. We certainly ought to refinance, as you might refinance your home mortgage, refinance the outstanding debt that might be even higher, 5, 6%, whatever. Secondly, yes, you're right, we can borrow money, and in the Grow America Act, which I happen to like, there is an infrastructure bank. One of the proposals by my Democratic colleague, Mr. Delaney from Maryland, would use that foreign profits that are hidden overseas, bring that back home, tax some of it, put some of that into transportation, and put the rest of it into an infrastructure bank, achieving exactly what you talked about, very low interest rate loans that cities, counties, municipalities, states could use to repair their bridges, build their infrastructure, their transit systems, trains, buses, light rail systems, and the like. That's a very good idea. The Grow America Act has a somewhat smaller proposal in it, but nonetheless, this infrastructure bank concept has been around for a long time. But unfortunately, here's where the hang-up is. It can be deficit financing. And the mantra, much of what you heard about in the previous discussion with Mr. Cole, talked about the deficit. Well, yes, there is a deficit, and yes, it is a problem. The question is, what are you spending the money on? If you spend the money on transportation, you'll find that for every dollar you spend, you will create about $2.50 of economic growth. In other words, you get a return on your investment, not only in having a solid infrastructure, but also creating jobs, and in creating the jobs, you create new tax revenue. So it's a win-win-win all the way around. Thank you for your question.
There's a story in the paper today taking a look at the transportation bill and taking a look at a coming deadline dealing with trains, dealing with the subject of positive train control. Could you first explain what positive train control is and talk about this deadline coming up?
Yes. A positive train control is a situation, is a program, an electronic program in which we know exactly where the train is. You know where it's going, you know its speed, you know where other trains are, and what it does, it sets up in the cab of that locomotive a mechanism that would either slow down or stop a train in an emergency situation. For example, the Philadelphia accident. Had there been positive train control, the engineer would not have been able to enter that curve at too high a speed. Now, this has been put into the law more than a decade ago as a result of an accident that occurred in California. It takes a long time to build these systems. We got hundreds of thousands of miles of rail line out there, and these systems have to be put in every mile along the track. It takes time, and it's also very, very expensive. Now, the rail companies, including Amtrak, have been working towards this goal of getting the positive train control in place. It hasn't been completed. Now, the way the law presently says, if you don't have positive train control, you're not moving the train down the track. Well, the positive train control is not going to be completed by the deadline, and therefore we're faced with an option.
When is the deadline?
It comes up, I think, at the end of this year. That deadline says no trains can move unless there's positive train control. Now what do? There is no positive train control. We stop the rails? No, we're not going to do that. We're going to, I think, extend the deadline, move it forward a year, 2 years, and continue to force the rail companies, which they're doing. They're actually spending billions of dollars on this and other improvements to get on with the process. Part of it is Amtrak. In an effort to save money, to reduce the deficit, the Amtrak budget has been held in a very, very tight domain. Not enough money to get everything done. One of the things that Amtrak has not been able to do is to complete its part of the positive train control. So we will extend it, at least I think we ought to extend it, unless we're going to shut down the rail lines, which is not a good idea. And so we'll move forward, but we must force the system to continue to move expeditiously to get this done. It will create a safer system.
Even though what we saw in Philadelphia, are you concerned with even giving an extension? Given what we saw in Philadelphia, now we're going to give an extension that, and who knows what happens between now and then?
Well, you're between a rock and a hard place, aren't you? Okay, we're not going to extend the deadline, and under the current law, you can't run the trains. You can't run Amtrak, you can't run the freight rail. What does that mean? Well, that means you basically have shut down a large portion of the economy, and a lot of commuters are going to be sitting. The problem in Philadelphia may very well have been a human error problem. The engineer should have known that he was going into that turn too fast. So you still have an engineer in place. Mm-hmm. You still have the trains operating as they have for years. You will not have this electronic system to assist in the safety of the train. But nonetheless, the rails are relatively safe. Now, we got real serious problems with the shipment of crude oil, which is another issue that needs to be dealt with. And unfortunately, I think that Congress have not taken this seriously enough. What I think we ought to do for the crude oil that's being shipped through our communities is we ought to force the oil companies to reduce the volatility, that is the explosiveness of the oil that are on those trains, and to slow those trains down as they move through our communities.
We're joined by Representative John Garamendi of California. Next call, Betty from Fort Worth, Texas. Democrats line, hello.
Hello, Betty.
Hello. Good morning.
It is a good morning.
I am an octogenarian. I'm 85 years old.
Oh, congratulations.
I lived through the first depression in the 30s when people had nothing to live off on. And I am calling about the federal deficit. I can recall when we had I believe it was the Vietnam War under Lyndon Johnson. Mm-hmm. To help pay for that war, we paid a surtax. I paid it. In fact, I've been paying taxes for 63 years, and I'm still paying taxes. And I think that part of the problem with this war that we've had is that everybody was on board. They were happy to go to war, but nobody wants to finance it.
Well, you've raised what is an ongoing issue. We're going to see that issue in the budget issue that the deal that was put together last night, and you're probably going to see it for many days to come. The Iraq II war was the first war, well, the Afghanistan and the Iraq II war were the first war in American history that was not paid for. It was literally borrowed money, most of it coming from borrowing from China. So we actually asked China to finance that war. We sold them the bonds, much of what we talked about a few moments ago. The result, we ran up a huge deficit. And then you added on top of that the 2008 economic collapse, and then the deficit got even bigger. We're still in that same problem today. We are not financing our wars. We're adding money to the defense budget. You can argue whether it's necessary or not, whether all the programs are necessary, and I have some questions about the necessity, for example, of engaging in a new $1 trillion nuclear arms race, but that's also underway. So the point you made is absolutely accurate. The current wars are on borrowed money. We did not finance these wars as we had all the previous wars with an increase in the taxes. So we fought the wars without a burden to the American taxpayer at that time. Future taxpayers are going to get to pay for it, and that's not right.
A viewer off of Twitter, we were just talking about positive train control, he said this: Amtrak is playing chicken with the law. They had more than ample opportunity to complete PTC and didn't. Now they want extensions.
Opportunity in terms of time? Absolutely true. There was enough time. There wasn't enough money. The Congress of the United States has been starving Amtrak for years, and the money that they needed to increase, to build the positive train control, to buy the new cars, to upgrade their services, simply wasn't made available. And so it's stretched out.
Does any rail system that installs this positive train control, is that federal money involved as well? Do they get money to do that from the federal government?
Yes and no. Amtrak certainly yes. Some of the other rail lines putting it in themselves, but they do have tax benefits that are associated with that expenditure.
From Lewis, Colorado, here is Joe. Good morning. Republican line. You're on.
Hello, Joe.
Yes, good morning. First, I'd like to commend you, Mr. Representative, for being an American first and not a Democrat or a Republican.
Well, thank you.
Should run to the White House.
Well, go ahead.
It was very simply this. You want to know about fraud. Social Security is where you should start first with the law firms and judges. My wife and I were employers. We paid in for many years, and because we chose to fire a law firm who wanted us to commit fraud and say that we didn't have a vehicle worth less than $3,500, we couldn't be insured. Until Obamacare came along, as a Republican, I was shocked. But until Obamacare came along, my wife's cancer couldn't be reinsured or taken care of. So when I went to apply, when I mentioned that I had 4 laminectomies and 2 discs taken out of my back, the guy at Social Security right away made the decision that I was a fraud. By the time I finally got a hearing, I didn't have enough quarters to qualify for disability after owning a construction company for nearly 17 years and paying in large amounts of money. So, and I'm not complaining. My point is I'm an American first and a Hispanic second. So this country only promised us an opportunity. But my question is, why is everybody afraid to look at how the Social Security judges and law firms are in bed with one another and try to make criminals out of us at the age of 63 or 60 by lying so we can get Medicaid?
Well, you raised an issue that is ongoing concern of all of us. I raised this point early on when we talked about Social Security disability program. Your description of your medical circumstances should, now listen, I'm a long way from Colorado, so I'm not able to really judge this, but that kind of a medical problem should be evaluated by a medical doctor and make a determination that yes, you are disabled, or no, you are not disabled, and then if you are, then the appropriate benefits should be available to you. What you've described is the other side of the coin of disability insurance fraud, and that is legitimate cases of a disabled individual not being able to get it because of some decision made by a clerk. Perhaps there was a lawyer involved, maybe not, and that's not right. And so what I've suggested, and what we did in California when I was the insurance commissioner there, was to set up a mechanism so that there would be an honest medical evaluation of a disability. Yes, it is disabling to a certain percentage or not, and then you can go forward knowing that what the actual medical circumstances are. We'll see. With regard to your case, you may want to contact your local congressman. I know that in my district in California, we get numerous Social Security, disability issues, Medicare, Medicaid issues all of the time, and we work with the appropriate federal agency to try to sort out what is the situation and what kind of benefits, if any, are appropriate. So you may want to contact your local congressperson and ask them to assist you.
A viewer off of Twitter asked about dealing with budget shortfalls with an increase of the gasoline tax. Would you support an increase of gasoline tax to pay for transportation?
We don't need to go there. And the Grow America Act is a very good example. It does not increase the gasoline or the diesel tax. What it does is it brings home to America profits of American corporations that are hidden in tax havens overseas. And that's what can be done. I will note that the gasoline tax and the diesel tax has not been increased since 1993-94. And therefore, given inflation and everything else, it doesn't buy nearly as much. And we also have far more efficient automobiles. The gas miles per gallon significantly increased, probably doubled over that period of time. So the value, the ability of the gasoline tax to finance the transportation system has significantly diminished.
From Brunswick, Ohio, Paulie, Independent Line. Hi there.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I like to know how you're going to vote on the trade palace.
I suppose you're talking about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the trade deal?
About the trade policy, about TPP?
Yep, that's it, TPP. Everything I know about it would lead me to a no vote. Now, we don't know everything about it. It is still a secret document. Some information has been leaked, but it nonetheless has not been made public. Now, what I think I know about it, what I've heard about it, what some of the early versions of it have, for example, the gutting of the Buy America provisions, which I talked about a few moments ago. It basically would allow Japan and all of the other countries in that trade deal, and there are 10 other countries, to have full access to the American taxpayer dollars as though they were actually in America, building the steel, building the trains, building the buses here in the United States. I don't like that, and that alone is reason enough for me to vote against it, if in fact that is still in the bill. And so we'll see. It has not been made public. I don't think it is going to be made public for another month or more, and then we'll see what's exactly in it. But I am very, very concerned about it. Most of these trade deals have been good for everybody but the American worker. When the first deal went through with the World Trade Organization and then the North America NAFTA deal, we have since that time lost about 8 million manufacturing jobs in the United States, and those are good middle-class family jobs that are long gone. We can bring them back with good policies like Buy America, like good transportation program that builds the foundation, the infrastructure that we need for economic growth in the future.
On a Republican line, here's Rick from Louisville, Kentucky. Go ahead.
Yes. I was wondering when we were going to get serious about the fraud and defense contracting, as well as hiring private contractors to carry out our defense needs. I think there should be a site, just like you can access nonprofits' tax returns, but maybe Congress needs to have some of those Senate and House committee hearings where they bring their tax forms yearly and share it with the public, and also support them with whistleblower protection within their organizations. Thanks.
Well, you've raised three different issues there. With regard to the whistleblowers, they are protected. They're an important part of how we learn what's going on in government programs, in government contracting programs and the like. Secondly, with regard to the nonprofits, I'll give you one example of a nonprofit that is a major problem for America, and that is the super PACs, the 501c4s, nonprofits that are now really dominating the political life in America, usually with just a handful of very, very wealthy individuals creating a super PAC and using that nonprofit status to be able to dramatically influence the elections in the United States. It is a serious, serious problem for our democracy. And of course, there are plenty of other problems in the nonprofit realm also. With regard to the contracting for defense contractors, an ongoing issue, nothing new. This dates back to George Washington and trying to get proper guns and cannons for the Continental Army back in 1777-78. And this is an ongoing problem. We need clear oversight. We need congressional review of contracts. In fact, in about an hour from now, the House Armed Services Committee will be holding a hearing on contracting, how to improve the contracting, make it faster, make it simpler, make it cheaper, and we'll see. An ongoing issue. It's been with us since the very inception of this nation. Harry Truman, in World War II, actually gained notoriety across the United States, so much so that he became a vice president, and then, of course, after Roosevelt died president, by running a series of hearings during World War II on defense contractors. Thank you for your question.
The Washington Post this morning has a story about possible proposal changes for activities going on in Syria. It says one of the proposals being considered would be to put a small number of U.S. advisors on the ground in Syria for the first time since the United States had operations there against the Islamic State. Also, when it comes to the Iraq side, the president's top advisors recommended embedding U.S. advisors at the brigade level. On a snapshot, since you're just hearing about it, what do you think about these ideas of changing what's going on as far as U.S. involvement in Syria?
I said when this whole thing started, when ISIS started a year and a half ago, I said, this is going to put us on a slippery slope. And Congress must carry out its constitutional responsibility of declaring war. We've not done so. The President's action is based upon an interpretation of a 2003 declaration of war, which is now called an authorization to use force, and applying it to the current ISIS situation in Iraq at a time when he claimed that the war was over. It's restarted, obviously. Syria, the same situation. No declaration of war. The bombings are taking place, again, based upon a legal interpretation of the Afghanistan declaration to use force, claiming that in Syria there are elements of al-Qaeda. Nusra, I think, was the specific one that was used to justify it. This is a legal stretch. And frankly, Congress has abdicated its constitutional responsibility. I said then, and I'll say today, it's a slippery slope. In for a dime, in for a dollar. And now we've seen the first American death in combat since the end of the Iraq War 3 years ago. And we're going to see more. We have a responsibility. We need to set the parameters. And if we want troops on the ground, which is precisely what this would be, then let's say so. Let's be clear about it. Let the American people know. Let's have a full debate about what it means. It is a very serious situation, and Russia's involvement makes it even more complex. Not that it wasn't complex to begin with. And we have to deal with it. But we are not carrying out our responsibility, and the result is that we are not creeping, we are sliding into a new ground war in the Middle East.
Eric, Cedartown, Georgia, Democrats lying. You're next.
Yeah, thank you. We don't want no troops in Syria. We don't have no money for that. Mr. Garamendi, let me tell you what you Democrats are finna do with this the bipartisan budget deal. What you people are finna do, you're finna make the Democrats lose this next election. That bipartisan deal where you're talking about cutting Social Security, I know you're going to vote for it. Democrats going to vote for it, but I know Republicans not going to vote for this deal. This bipartisan deal, it's bad. It's all these bad deals, they come under this bipartisanship. You know the reason why? Because they're bad for my community, the African-American community. When you cut welfare up under Bill Clinton, that was bad. When you passed those crime bills up under Bill Clinton, that was bad. This bipartisan bill where you're finna cut Medicare and you're finna cut Social Security, you Democrats are finna lose. Remember, Bill Clinton didn't have someone follow him up as president because Newt Gingrich and all those bad policies put together, it turned people off once they realized what you people were doing. Just because you say bipartisan, that don't mean that these deals are good for Democrats. Only time they'll enter into a deal as well with y'all Democrats when you have a Democrat in the White House. Listen, just like Tip O'Neill, when he agreed with Ronald Reagan, but they would not agree with nothing with you Democrats. They push everything on you all bad policies.
Okay, Eric.
Well, you've raised one of the great dilemmas that my party has, and that is we don't control Congress. We've not controlled the Congress of the United States since the 2010 election. That would be January 2011. The Republicans, a very, very conservative party now, has controlled Congress. And this last year, they took control of the Senate. They run the show. We can object, but they do have to come to us to get the votes. And then we're able to provide some leverage and get at least a better deal. Now, the president does have the veto, but that veto might very well have led to a shutdown of the government through the debt limit, or in December 11th of this year, a shutdown because there's no money. So we have to negotiate. We have no choice but to negotiate. And frankly, our negotiations have led to a far better outcome for Social Security, which is not cut, for Medicare, which is not cut. Now, in the Social Security disability program, there is a modest, and I think, frankly, an insufficient way of dealing with the fraud that has occurred in that system. We know that there's, from the previous discussion, Mr. Cole talked about the issue of Medicare fraud. Yes, there is serious Medicare fraud, perpetrated mostly by doctors and a few hospitals out there. What we need to do is to go after that fraud And interestingly, the money to go after it was cut by the Republican Congress. They reduced the money that the IRS needed, the Internal Revenue Service needed, to investigate those doctors and hospitals that were thought to be defrauding the system. And so the money to the policing money was cut. Now, it is our task to make sure that the benefits necessary for those who are in need are adequate. And as a Democrat, we'll continue to fight for that. But we're also going to fight for jobs. And that takes us back to the transportation infrastructure, which is the premier jobs program. We could put millions of Americans immediately to work with a robust, strong, fulsome transportation infrastructure program. That's our task. Right now, the Senate bill does not do it. The House bill does not do it. It continues the current mediocrity that has caused 63,000 bridges in America to be inadequate, many of them downright dangerous, subject to collapse. It's caused our roads in California. 30% of the highway lanes in California are inadequate, filled with potholes, and you go on and on, the freight movement and so forth. We need to build America. That's what we stand for, American families having decent jobs, building the infrastructure of this nation.
One more call. This is Terry from Akron, Ohio, independent line.
Oh, thanks for taking my call. I like the congressman to comment on, there was a bill sitting in the House that would allow, say, public employees like police and firemen who have worked for years and contributed in Social Security as well as working their jobs for the public, and they only get a portion of the benefits that are allowed. And it seems unfair that they should work all those years contributing to Social Security and only get a portion of what they are really entitled to.
Sure.
Could you please comment on that, and I'll hang up and listen to your response. Thank you.
Yeah, this is one of those reforms. I think Mr. Cole talked about this back in the Reagan, actually it was in the Bush, the elder Bush period, a Social Security reform that said for people that had Social Security, that had worked in programs where there was a Social Security payment and then switched over to a government, usually a government, always a government program, like teachers or firemen, policemen, where they do not pay into the Social Security system. It would deny them, when they reach 65, to be able to access that portion of the Social Security that they paid for in some part of their working life. I think it's unfair. Obviously, I think you do also, that I believe they ought to be able to receive their appropriate Social Security benefit based upon what they paid for during their working life. That's not the law today. This is an ongoing issue, a particular problem I know in California with the teachers in California that may have spent the first 10 years of their working life working at a restaurant, paying into Social Security, go back to school, become a teacher, not pay into Social Security. Then when they become 65, they cannot take advantage of the 10 years that they did pay. It's wrong. It ought to change. It ought to be part of a larger reform, again, which Mr. Cole talked about. We need to do that reform. We're probably okay for the next, on the larger Social Security solvency issue for about the next 10 years, maybe longer. But eventually this issue of this split needs to be addressed. I would hope it would be addressed now because it's unfair.
Our guest currently serves on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committees and the Armed Services Committee, and is previously you were a rancher?
I am a rancher.
I ask you that only because there's a story coming out of the World Health Organization about the role of red meat, and it says that a research division says that bacon, sausage, processed meats causes cancer, and that red meat probably does too. What's your snapshot opinion of that?
Anything in excess will cause a problem, but everything in moderation is probably good for you. But if you want to eat red meat morning, noon, and night and a lot of processed food, chances are you're doing too much of it. But there's been a lot of studies over the years about everything red wine solves all problems. Well, it could, but if you drink too much of it, you got a problem. Too much red meat, you're probably going to have a problem. But no, I don't believe that red meat is going to be the end of anybody's life. In fact, it's a good source of protein and a good source of a healthy diet in its moderation.
Representative John Garamendi of California, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Pedro.
Coming up on our program, we're going to take a look at the allowances that members of Congress get to spend on their offices and other topics related to that. Bradford Fitch, President and CEO of the Congressional Management Foundation, will talk about those newly proposed spending rules when Washington Journal continues.